You'd get off the train in Idle Falls and walk down to Grand Perils. I remember that part, but
I didn't get to go.
Gordon didn't get to go with us, that's true.
Yeah, he
He was too little, he had to stay in Las Vegas. Do you remember? You remember riding the train up from Vegas?
Yeah. You?
No. That's why I'm asking you.
How old were you?
It's probably 12.
Were we that old?
Uncle Gail saved these for his life. Did you know that?
Yeah.
I think we're filling up our phone's memory with a lot of nothing here.
Yeah.
Nope, this is good stuff.
He learned how to work. He loved it. Hoeing beets.
Yeah, he was more like a dad.
Yeah.
It was.
How old were you when you first started coming here, Rex?
I think I was. Well, let's see. We moved to Vegas when I was in the second grade. And so I was probably 10 years old. And the mother would drive us up to Grandma and Grandpa's place. But shoot, I don't know.
I remember, you know that,
He got on a train.
that, oh well, yeah, we rode a train up a few times too,
train.
but there was a post on Facebook about what not to do. In the old days, somebody was laying in the back window. I remember sleeping in the back window of that old car driving up from Vegas.
Wow. Do you remember the air conditioning units we had on those cars
Yeah,
in those days?
440. 4 windows down, 40 miles an hour.
No. The big round tube thing you hooked in the
Oh.
window. Do you remember those?
No, I don't remember that.
You fill them with water, and when you drive down the road, and the water blows through that tube, and the evaporative cooling would blow a little cool air in the window.
Oh my goodness.
I remember those units, but I don't remember one on a car. We probably had one. What was that old car? It was stick shift, and Mom would drive it all the way from Los Angeles. We'd leave at night. I remember that part because it's too hot to drive across the desert in the daytime.
Yeah. Hang a canvas bag full of water on the front of the car.
That's right. In the front, there was a canvas bag full of water. Air would keep it cool. That's what we drank. Come on. Wake up. Tell us the story. You're the oldest. You should remember those better than I do.
He'll remember if you just tell him.
Yeah.
You remember when our next door neighbor, when we were in Las Vegas, killed a rattlesnake with a shovel that was...
We call about that.
I remember we couldn't go out and play on the street at night because we were on this side of the street and the other side was the desert, and the rattlesnakes would come and lay on the road at night. They wouldn't let us go out and play.
That was in North Las Vegas.
Yeah, North Las Vegas.
I remember next door, must have been about 4 at the time. The next door neighbors had twin girls that were about the 4, and I thought they were so cute. Judy and Jane, I think.
Oh, that they lived behind the store, didn't they? Or did they live over on the?
The ones I'm thinking about lived in the house next door to us when we lived on, I think, Butler.
Was that across in the desert?
Yes.
Oh, really? I don't remember.
Because we could occasionally look over the fence and watch tarantulas walking across between us and the desert.
Yeah, I remember Mom opening in the closet in the hallway, open her door up here, and a scorpion run down her arm.
I remember that one.
Well, they used
Scream.
to live in Caliani.
Yeah.
Well,
They
yeah,
had rattlesnakes on their porch.
Oh, yeah.
there was a rock fence. It was a flood fence. We'd take a stick and run along edge of it, and they go cluck, 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 and the rattlesnake would just buzz like crazy.
And then we have a house that's kind of on a hill, so it's stepped up like
Yeah.
that. And so I put a towel around our neck and jump off from one to the other and be Superman.
With the rattlesnakes underneath us. Yeah,
Golly, I didn't-
yeah,
I
it
wasn't
was a
around
flood.
those
It
days.
was a flood fence, and it was rock stacked in wire mesh fencing.
You remember when you burned down somebody's barn?
Well, that was down here. He also run a tractor into the side of the garage.
Yes, he did.
Whose barn did you burn
Yeah,
down?
who's? Well, that was up in Newdale, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I don't remember the story, but
What they did was, when they were out
Gordon and
of
I must have been
school-
angels. Huh? Rex got that name.
How old were you when you used to get on a train, when you got out of school in the summertime, and travel? Aunt Ruth would pick you up
Yeah, she picked us up in Salt Lake.
in Salt Lake.
That only happened twice.
Yeah, I know that.
I wasn't there.
Then we'd get on a train and come to Idle Falls, and I remember walking from the railroad tracks down to Grandma Pearl's.
You do?
Don't you? You had to. You had to show me where to go because I didn't know where it was. She had that piano studio up above the hub bar.
That's right, in Idaho Falls.
Yeah.
Do you remember when we were in Caliani and the pack rats stole our dad's teeth?
I remember the story
Our
about that,
dad
but I
had
don't.
just two front teeth were false, and you'd take them out and set them on the nightstand at night. And the pack rats come and carried them off.
You remember how he got those two front teeth?
No.
Cranking an old Ford car to start it, and the back hit him in the teeth and knocked him out. That's the story I remember about it.
But they learned to work. He learned how to work,
Uncle Gale did.
Uncle Gale.
You know, he was only 15 years older than me. I remember when we'd come up, he'd be out in the field on a tractor, and Rex and I'd run out and find him. I mean, even back then, Uncle Gale was who we looked up to.
One of my fondest memories is when Grandpa Reed took me with him one day out to rake hay. And he was still raking hay with horses, with those giant work horses. And he'd sit me up on top of the giant workhorse with those horns. My little legs just stick straight out there, so the horse was so big. That was one of my fondest memories of Grandpa Reed.
Well, now you're cracking memories. Remember the old International Harvester tractor he had? And I was pulling him on a trip rake. Went over a dike, and it went, and he just went over, ass over backwards. Flew in the air. Yeah. He didn't cuss me. He got up and crawled back on. He went back to raking hay. Then Gail and I and Grandpa were cleaning ditch. We come to a place where there's a fence across. And then, usually put a board there so cows in it. Gail grabbed the board and threw it back like this out of the road and looked around. He'd hit Grandpa right square in the head and knocked him cold. Poor Grandpa.
Tell him the time that he was on a horse.
Well, he was on Sunny, yeah.
Did you?
I
ever
wasn't
milk-
there.
Did you ever milk Grandpa's cows at Grandpa Reed's house? Did you go down the barn and milk cows?
We did a lot of that. That was our
Morning.
way of getting out of hauling or digging spuds, wasn't it? The guy that got to go milk the cows got to quit digging spuds, go down and sit in the barn where it was cool.
I think I remember. You have to verify this story, Gary. I went down with you, and you were milking that blue tick cow, and she slapped you in the face with her tail,
Oh, I got that tail many
and you
more times. than-
doubled up your fist and slugged her in the guts,
Oh, I don't remember that.
and she dropped to her knees.
I didn't do that. I do know I got slapped in the tail with a shitty tail a number of times across the eyes. Yeah.
I remember Uncle Gale walking out of that old barn down there one time, and that big yellow cat we had jumped down and landed right on his bald head.
Oh, really? Yeah, that was. I remember one time when he had the dairy and moving bales. He was scared stiff of snakes. And there was a snake laying under the bale. He comes down with his pitchfork like that and hits it. The snake wraps around the pitchfork and goes straight in the air and comes down and wraps around his neck. And he was just standing in the corner, almost hallucinating, shaking his head. And then Marion, right after we got married, Marion caught a water snake and went to give it to him. Oh my goodness sakes. Did she get a lecture about snakes? She had no idea Gail was that scared of water or any type of snake. She found out quick she didn't harass Gail with any type of snake.
Tell them the story about the horse.
Well, I wasn't there, but Grandpa and Gail were up where's White and Shells? It was on their piece of ground up the top, changed water, and Grandpa would rather walk back to the house. He got on Sonny.
Yeah.
Sonny and Migo were in that pasture, but they had a hot wire on both sides of the ditch. Somehow Sonny hit the hot wire, and Grandpa and Sonny ended upside down in the ditch with Grandpa on the bottom. Gail told me that story. I wasn't involved in that. Just my horse.
I remember riding Amigo. Amigo was such a good horse. I could jump up on her and ride her bareback with no bridle, nothing. And when I fell off, she'd just stop, stand still, let me climb back on.
She was a good old horse.
She was a good horse.
Yeah, I remember when he bought her. Horse trader down there, he'd got her out of Driggs, stopped and walked out, and Grandpa and I were changing water. And anyway, he bought us for us. Went to the house, and I think he paid $75 for that horse. Wrote out a check. He needed a horse like he needed a hole in the head, but he knew we wanted it, or I wanted it anyway. Yeah, we had a lot of fun on that horse.
Yeah.
We're doing all the talking. Speak up, boy.
Yeah.
You
Tell
got
him about
you got the
time-
longer memory than the
Tell
rest
them
of
about
us.
the time that Grandpa was on a horse, and the horse died.
Well, he wasn't on the horse. He had walked. He used to walk past when we had the trailer across from Grandma and Grandpa. He'd walk past the house, and he'd go over there to water Amigo. And he walked past. That was when I was working at the hospital. And Amigo didn't come over to the water, so he grabbed a hold of the hauler to pull her around, and she was dead on her feet. Just tipped over on top of him.
Yeah.
And they couldn't get it. And I went out to go to work, and I could hear this hollering, and I went out to Crail, and there was Grandpa laying under Amigo, and I couldn't get it out. I had to go get Gail and get the farmhand and raise
Lift that horse
the horse up, get Grandpa out from underneath her.
memory you got, and tell us some of your long-term memories.
Yeah.
What's your earliest memory, Rex?
I don't know. I'm listening to these two guys. I'm wondering where I was.
You were there. You were probably the instigator of most of it.
Gail taught them boys how to work.
Well, let me put it this way. He said, if you will mow those or go weed those spuds, I'll take you on the river.
Yeah.
That's how he taught us how to work. We had an incentive.
It was a risk and reward type of deal.
I remember going deer hunting with you two back on the river, and Gary and I were coming through the woods, and you were up on the railroad tracks on the railroad track bridge, and the deer started coming through, and you were up there like the rifleman, bam, 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 and I don't know how many got down, but I remember we went over to cut one of them's throat, and it wasn't really dead. Kicked you good. You remember that?
Yeah.
My brother was a hunter. We were up to the dry farm. Rex and Uncle Gale and Glenn and I. And he had Uncle Glenn's 30-30, and a deer was running up the side of the hill. He levered every shell out of that gun, never pulled the trigger. You can't defend yourself. I tell these stories on this.
I thought you was gonna,
Oh, we laughed.
I thought you was gonna tell the one about the time that I took off running and threw Uncle Glenn's rifle.
30-06. Yeah.
Yeah, 30-06.
Scratched it up, and we felt so bad. One he brought home from the military.
What happened?
Oh, we were hunting, and Uncle Glenn looked. I was too young to carry a gun. He let Rex carry the gun, and we were running over to a place they told us to go to watch, and Rex tripped and threw the gun out there, and it got all scratched up in the rocks.
That same hunt back on the river, I was pretty young and pretty stupid. All I had was a shotgun, a double-out shot. Remember that? And when the deer started running everywhere, one of them was running straight toward me, and I blasted. It kept going, and I didn't think a lot about it. But later on, I was telling you about what happened. You said we better go back and look for that deer, and we went back and we found it. I killed it dead.
We shot a lot of deer back there when it was mule deer.
Yeah.
The minute they planted whitetail, I think David was the only one that ever shot a deer back there then. But the mule deer, they would go through a clearing and stop and look back, and you got a shot. The whitetail, they just walk around you, and I don't ever remember shooting a whitetail back there. David poached a few back there.
I did what?
Brought
Can't believe
brought
you
some
do something
home.
like that.
Brought the meat home.
Well, we lived on deer meat all the time we was going to college. I could drive from Pocatello, go back on the river, shoot a deer, and be back Pocatello to class at 9 o'clock. Whenever I wanted to. That's what we lived on when I went to college. We didn't waste a drop of meat, but that's what we lived on.
I tried that, and I got a deer, and Larry Jean cooked it. And the first deer meat she cooked, she broke out in hives from
Oh,
head
dear.
to toe.
Oh,
I don't think I ever went deer hunting again.
wow.
You remember when we was right up here? You and I went, and we
Yeah,
took
I remember
Sonny and
that.
Migo, and
Yeah,
I shot 3.
you made me do all the work.
Did not. We loaded those 3 deer out. Well, we only had 2 tags. Loaded those 3 tags, hauled them down the entrance there to Little Kelly, and we took 2 home and hid the other and went back up that night and got it.
You did what?
I better, you're recording this. They'll throw me in jail, throw the key away.
That's right.
You cut yourself or something trying to.
Oh, that's right, I did, and you
and
had to
that's
clean
why I
them.
had to do all the work.
That's right. When I cut the throat of the first one, I cut my finger, and Gordon did have to clean all 3 of them.
He just told you he cut his finger.
No, I was bleeding like a son of a gun.
Yeah, you really did a good job.
I had forgot that. Well, you learned how to clean a deer, didn't you?
I sure did.
I took Grandma up there one time, up Little Kelly on the horses, and right where we were, and shot a couple of deer. And she cussed me because she didn't get to shoot one, but yeah, I took a lot of deer out of that canyon. Well, Grandma and I took a lot of horse packing trips. There was sometimes we'd both get home and work about 5 o'clock, and we'd load Sonny and no, it was George and Cindy in the back of the old pickup and go up to Palisade Creek and ride up as far as the lower lake and just camp out. I remember we were camped out one night and Woke up in the middle of the night and there was a cotton picking owl sitting right above our head, just a hooting away. Shooing away so we could get back to sleep. We did that quite a few times, just Grandma and I.
And left me on the ranch to work.
Left you. Somebody had to do all the work. That was after you were married and gone. That was after I was married, that part. Rex didn't like to hunt like I did. I think Rex had shot a deer, he'd have cried. Held his head. In fact, I think he did hold his head and cry one time when he was up there shooting deer.
Oh.
But I want to hear. I remember us riding the train, like Paloma said, and the military. It was during right at the end of the Second World War, 45 somewhere, and the military guys on the train would give us a penny or a nickel to go get them a drink, and I guess it was just to get us out of their hair. I don't know, but I remember doing that. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
How old were you?
And we. I don't know. I couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. That would have put you 10 or 11, so that's about right. Why they would let? I wouldn't have let my kids ride on a train that far alone.
Different days.
And Aunt Ruth
It was a
would
time.
pick you up.
Yeah, Aunt Ruth picks us up and keep us overnight, and then put us on the train the next morning. And we'd come on up to Idaho.
Well, we'd. I remember that Aunt Ruth took us to the park to see the wild animals. The day after we got there, and then the next day they'd put us on the train to go to Idaho Falls.
See, now I don't remember going to a zoo. So
don't-
you,
you
no,
don't remember seeing the wild animals?
I don't remember that part. No. Well, you got a lot more memories of those. See, before this scar on my head, I don't remember anything. In my younger years, my mom said I had brains because she could see them when I poked that hole in the head. But I before that, and I was what, 5 years old when that happened. I don't remember my younger. Rex remembers being young up to Newdale. I don't remember that at all. I think my earliest remember that really sticks out in my mind is when we were down east of Ryrie and the pigs were eating the cow alive. The cow was sick and down, and Dad was in Las Vegas, and Mom called probably Uncle Gale or Grandpa to come kill the cow. Do you remember that? We were looking out the kitchen window, the sink, and the pigs were eating the cow. That part I remember.
You remember going to school in Las Vegas?
What?
Do you remember when you were going to school in Las Vegas?
He was
Yeah.
in the second grade.
What grades did you go to school in Las Vegas?
Well, I went to the second grade, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth.
But we didn't all those we didn't go to the same school.
No. And then the girl that Craig sat next to, that sat ahead of us, Kara Roberry. She introduced me into the school in Las Vegas.
Oh, really? Huh.
And then the next 3 years, we started the new high school.
So we went to school in North Las Vegas, in Caliente. I went to I don't know where you did, but I went to a different school every year until I was in 7th grade. And in 7th grade, I went to North Las Vegas and Ryrie and Idaho Falls. 3 different schools in the 7th grade.
He
Remember that?
graduated from the Idaho Falls High
It
School.
was the 2nd grade for me, and I did all those schools in the 2nd grade.
Yeah, we moved around a lot.
What was it that made your dad want to go to Vegas?
He had we had a farm down here. He went to Las Vegas to play to make money. Back then, there wasn't any cash, and when he would play at nightclubs, people would tip in cash. When we lived down here, he played. There was a dance place down by Beach's Corner somewhere, and he would come home and stack up the dollars, silver dollars on the counter, and that was his tips. But he went to Las Vegas to play, and he bought a drugstore. Why? I don't know why.
We had a drugstore called the Fountain Drug.
Yeah. And then that was losing money, so he went to Caliani, and I don't know what he bought or managed the Cove Tavern.
Yeah, the Cove.
Cove Tavern in Caliani.
That was in his.
And
teeth
Rex
got
and I
stolen.
would ride the train to Caliani and stay with Dad.
So was
Sleeping.
Mom and I still in Las Vegas? Well,
Yeah, you got to stay with Mom.
Helen White worked at the drugstore at the
Oh my
Fountain.
gosh, I hadn't heard that
Helen
name.
White was always fixing me free drinks.
Who?
That's Helen White.
I now that you mention that name, it rings a bell.
Yeah, she was good to me.
We used to ride our bikes to school from there. I remember going out in front of the drugstore, and there was a bar next door, and the guys would get drunk and have fights with money, and Rex and I'd go out and gather it all up the next morning. I remember picking quarters and half dollars.
Go out and throw money at each other.
Yeah, we'd go. And did you do that? Did you go pick up the money too?
I
Yeah.
remember doing that.
Oh, that's
I was only about 6, I think, but I can remember doing that.
Well, they moved to Las Vegas because they had live music there instead of entertaining.
Well, yeah.
He and his
Dad played.
dad played. He owned the Elephant,
Well, he owned the White Elephant in Idaho
White
Falls.
Elephant in Idaho Falls.
He when we come back from Vegas, he managed the country club, and then he bought the White Elephant.
Yeah, the White Elephant. Tell him what that was.
Oh, that was something nice. That was probably the nicest restaurant in Idaho Falls at the time. The only thing that equaled it was a Jack's Chicken Inn. Jack's Chicken Inn?
Jack's Famous Chicken Inn.
Yeah, on the South Highway. But that restaurant, you could seat 170 people in the restaurant. You could seat about that in the bar, and then there was a banquet room. You could seat 500, because that's where my high school class had their dinner for seniors. And then there were 2 rooms you could seat almost 40 people in. And when Dad got sick, I run that thing for almost a year. It was quite the place back in
It
those
was.
days.
Before I went on my mission, I was working there, and I was the night watchman, and I was the janitor, and whatever else needed done. And while I was doing that, the chef was Jeff Walters, and they bought the first microwave oven probably in Idaho.
Right.
It was about the size of a refrigerator, but the actual cooking spot was about the size we have today. But Jeff Walters would fix me a lobster tail in there. It was so good. I remember Dad telling me to quit doing that. It's eating up the profits.
But that's what Grandma and I had on our anniversary, was lobster tail. And that's where we started, was when Dad had that restaurant, and we'd get lobster tail at the White Elephant.
Yesterday visited with my friend Lynn Harker, and one of his memories is when they'd go on dates, they'd bring him there and get lobster tail and get a big discount because of my dad. That was one of his favorite memories.
Well, Mom would work at Sears and come home, and then she'd go down and run the cash register at night.
Here's some on
And
like
my sister-
recorded.
Yeah,
Sister
Mama's
was there.
sister was a waitress there.
Waitress. My sister,
Yeah.
Yeah,
she did that all
yeah. She
for
worked with.
a long time.
worked,
She did. She was an excellent.
She was a good. Her and Keita Byington's mother, Charlie, were waitresses for Dad.
Oh,
They were. Those are the two I remember more than anything else.
I remember Dad saying waitresses can make you or break you.
White Elephant.
Jordan?
They really
What year
depended
was the
on them.
White
White
Elephant?
Elephant.
Well, I graduated in high school in '57, and Dad had owned it for 2 or 3 years before that, and then for a number of years after.
so
I
you
was
were
in I was in college when Dad got
I
cancer.
bet my mom remembers that then. I wonder, I'll have to ask her.
I
Yeah,
think
it was the place to go back in those days.
Yeah.
And Dad had what they called smorgasbord back in those days, which was a buffet, and that was his what thing to drew people to it, and he did very well with it. You remember the Chrysler you had that didn't have a fan on the heater, so you just open up the side thing, let the air blow through. That's how you got heat in the winter time.
Yeah.
What other car did you have?
I had a 36 Ford.
Drop some.
Is a 2-door. It had hydraulic brakes.
What color was it?
That's when I started dating Loma.
What did you just say?
What kind of a car did you have when he started dating you?
Well, I don't know the make of the car. We lived over there by the temple, and there was an empty space. He had a car, and he would. One time he took it and spun it around, and do you remember that?
I spun that car all over town.
Yeah. That's how we learned how to drive on slick roads, was spinning those cars around.
so how old were you when you moved from Caliente?
From Caliente or
Yeah.
Las Vegas.
Well, I mean from Vegas to Caliente, right?
I was in 7th grade.
Okay. And then you were in Caliente for how long?
Well, I went to 2nd and 3rd grade, I think, in Caliente. I remember 2nd grade. That old sandstone rock school. We actually lived in Caliente a couple of times. It's the first time we lived up that draw with the rock wall, and then the second time we lived over on the other side of town. I don't remember.
Yeah.
The only part I remember about over on the other side of town is Dad gave us a shovel to shovel up the garden, to spade the garden. That's all I remember about over there. Seemed like we had a dog over there.
So did you jump from Vegas to Caliente and then back again?
Yeah.
Okay. So then you decided to move, the decision was made to move back to Idaho Falls.
I think Mom decided to move home and Dad come back later.
I think the drugstore went broke.
Yeah. Because I remember when we come back, we lived with Grandma and Grandpa Reed. And Dad, no, it was the summer that Dad brought Lucky home. Remember the dog, Lucky? Dad brought the dog home and the dog got in his jacket pocket and puked. Dog got sick in the car, got car sick and puked in Dad's pocket.
I was in the 8th grade when they moved back to Vegas, moved to Idaho Falls.
But we went to school for probably 2 or 3 months in between there.
In Ryrie, well, when we went to school in Ryrie,
Yeah, we went to school. We went We went, was it Huntridge? Were we out in Huntridge? I know we lived out in
Yeah.
Huntridge at one time.
Yeah, that's where we first moved to.
That's where we first moved to, and then we moved to North Las Vegas?
Then we went
Went to North Las Vegas.
to Caliani first time, and then moved back to Vegas, and we lived in North Las Vegas. And then we moved back to Caliani before we moved to Idaho Falls.
And in North Las Vegas, wasn't that Butler Street? And that's where the desert was right across from our front gate.
I don't remember the name of the street, but Rex took Mary and I out there one time later on. Talk about the ghetto of town. Our old house in North Las Vegas. My gosh, that was
That's
the
where the
absolute
homeless live.
black ghetto of
Homeless.
Vegas. That was
For me, I don't remember really getting to ever spend much time with Dad, and it was probably similar for you guys.
It was
well.
hard-
He
it was
worked
hard to
nights, and you're
That's
right.
He worked nights, he worked days, it seemed like, but in my patriarchal blessing, it says, honor your father and your mother, because they are good people and did the best they could under the circumstances in which they have been placed.
get- Really? That's great.
Well, yeah, I didn't know Dad really. Taz used to ask me, tell me about Dad. I don't know anything about him. You know more just as much as I do. I didn't know him.
Yeah, you had to be quiet.
I went,
You couldn't make any noise when he
I
said.
went,
because
we
he
went
worked
hunting
nights
with,
and-
fishing with Dad once. I think the time we went hunting with Dad is the time you levered all the shells out of the gun.
Am I what?
I think the only time we went hunting with Dad, he drove us up there to the dry farm, and that's when you levered all the shells out of Uncle Gail's gun. Never fired a shot. You don't remember that?
No, I don't.
I don't know why I remember, but I sure do. That deer was running up the side of that hill, and I was laughing at you so hard I couldn't even shoot. You just levered shells out of that gun. We took a lot of deer out of that little grove of trees all through the years. And you know, Jerry Reed owns that ground. I thought it was Uncle Bill's, but that's Jerry Reed's. That's the part that he inherited.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
I saw him today.
yeah, he was there. He has a son, Lynn, that's buried up there. He died fairly young. What did he die? Remember what he died of, right? David? I think he died of cancer, but he's buried up on that piece of ground. I asked Jerry if I could buy it. Well, I asked Darla. She thought her dad would sell it to her. She says, no, he'll never sell it because that's where Lynn's buried. Huh.
I remember going to kindergarten in Las Vegas, and that may be the only. I may have done some first grade, but I remember going to kindergarten, and I got to take a blanket, and sometime during the day they gave us a carton of milk, and we drank our carton of milk and spread out on our blanket and took a nap.
He remembers that.
That was my kindergarten experience.
Sleeping on a nap.
You remember that? I remember it was at Christmas time and we got to draw Christmas scenes on the chalkboard all around the room. I got to do some of that Christmas time. I remember walking home from school one time and it snowed. It probably only lasted a day, but it did snow.
In Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember it snow in Las Vegas.
So you don't remember much about Dad. How about your mom? Tell us about your mom.
She worked in the store, drugstore.
She worked in the
Sears. She
drugstore,
worked
and then
for
when we
Sears
moved
for
here,
years.
she got a job at Sears and Roebuck and worked in the credit department.
She was there for
She
a
went
long
to
time.
business school. So I used to drive her down. It was down the other end of Capitol. I'd drive her down there to school, and then I'd drive to school. But yeah, she went and got her, whatever,
Yeah.
secretarial, and then she works, and she worked for Sears forever.
Years.
Yeah, she did some
Retired.
time at the Excelsior Beauty School run by Aunt
And
Della Roberry.
And Della Roberry.
That girl that sat in front of you today is Della's daughter.
Yeah. She, yeah, she did work up there before she started working for Sears. Well, that was right after we moved back, because I remember I went down to junior high to register. I don't know whether I was scared, I couldn't do it, but I walked, that was when it was Owie Bell. I walked back and got Mom from Excelsis and had her come down and help me register for the 7th grade, I guess it was.
Oh yeah, over at Owie Bell Junior High.
Yeah, cheapers. Yeah, and then she went to that business school and worked from Sears for all the rest of.
Yep, the rest of her working life.
Well, tell them what school you graduated from. High school.
I graduated from the New Idaho Falls High School.
He was in the class,
1955.
the first class that graduated, and I was the first class that went from sophomore, junior, and senior to that new high school. You graduated in 55, and I graduated in 57.
And I graduated in 61 from
There you go.
Idaho Falls High School. Go Tigers.
Did you live on First Street that whole time? Did you live in the house on First Street?
No,
We
we
lived
didn't.
in Capitol.
Oh,
We didn't move out to First Street until I was what, sophomore, junior in high school.
At least.
And at that time, the First and Tabor right there, that was way out of town, and we moved. That was when Dad was making some money in the club.
In the White Elephant Supper Club. Yeah.
They didn't have much money until before that. I remember when Bud first come to the States, and Dad had an old Nash car that looked like an upside down bathtub, and Bud had no idea how to drive. And Dad gave him that car. He painted it with a paintbrush,
I didn't
and he
know
drove that car. He learned how to drive stick shift with that car. I don't know if he drove
Well,
that
tell
down to college or.
Do you know who Bud and Taz is?
Well, yeah, they all know. But
Y'all
Taz,
know what
don't
Bud
you?
and Taz was?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember what car it was that we had when we lived out there on First Street, but it had an automatic transmission, and it was when I was just learning to drive.
The black and red one?
It seemed like it was kind of blue.
Oh, that was a DeSoto.
Yeah, okay, that was it. And so I remember coming home one evening and it had snowed really good, and the road was just slick as could be. And I heard that the thing to do was to slow down gradually, and so I downshifted. Round and round and round.
Yeah, Dad has DeSoto, but he had a brand new 1957 black. That's when they had fins on them.
I remember that.
What was that? That was a Dodge, wasn't it? What was it?
A Dodge.
I think it was a Dodge.
And we took Taz for a ride up. Anyway, we were coming back from up here. There was a rock in the road, and Dad straddled that rock and it hit the drive shaft and bent it.
Oh,
It was out of balance.
yeah, forevermore.
Actually, it ruined that car. He had to go. What did he buy? He bought a.
He bought a DeSoto.
Well, he had that DeSoto. Mom drove the DeSoto, but he bought it. What was the car that he wrecked when they were coming down? When Mom broke her leg and they found out Dad had cancer. That was a brand new car.
They had a white Ford at one time, and then they had a blue Dodge, I think it was.
so explain that. You said your mom broke her leg.
Well, I was going to school in Pocatello. Dad had bought a new car. They were coming, I don't know if it's coming down to see Marion and I or they're going on farther.
They,
But
they,
it-
they were going south.
Well, yeah, they were going south. That was through the lavas before they had the rails up. And it was slushy. And Dad went past the car and that thing spun out. And they spun off into one of those deep holes where there's rails now, but there wasn't then. Mom shattered her leg right here. Dad was in the hospital. I don't know. That's when they found out he had cancer.
I was on the mission.
Yeah, that's right. You were in the mission field. But then Mom moved out to Rex and Lomas, out to Roberts. And they took care of her
Yeah. She
out
was
there
with us
for,
a while.
she had 2 pins in her leg. Yeah,
And that leg was always about an inch shorter than the other one
it
forever
was.
after.
That's when I started running the club for Dad. I took a leave of absence from college and yeah, Gordon was in the mission field. You, Rex, you guys were out. That's when you moved to Afton. Right after that. Yeah, I'd close that club down and I'd go up and sit with Dad at the hospital for an hour or two and ask him how in the heck I did this or that. And he'd say, your bartender at the other end is stealing from you. How do you know that, Dad? Well, look at your receipts, he'd say. So I'd go tell the bartender, Dad says you're fired because you're stealing from him. He says, how do you know that? I was stealing from him, but I don't know how I knew it.
Oh, wow.
In the mission field, they didn't tell me anything about that wreck. And I think pretty much all my aunts and uncles were contributing to my mission and supporting me.
Yeah,
I didn't know that either. And when Dad was just within a week of passing away, somebody's mother let the mission president know, or somebody let them know that Dad wanted to see me one more time. And so somehow they flew me home from the mission, and I went up to the hospital and saw Dad, and he recognized me, but he couldn't talk really, and boy, you know, I didn't know what to say or do or anything, but I was up there with Mother the moment he passed away.
And Bud was there too, wasn't he? Because Bud, I had gone back to Pocatello, and Bud called me and said Dad passed away. And I had just barely got home that day.
Could have been. I don't remember anybody but Mom and me in the room.
Bud was
He
home
passed.
then. I don't know if he's up to the hospital, but Bud come
He
home.
was only in his 50s when he passed on.
56.
How
So-
long from the time he was diagnosed until he
Oh,
passed?
he was in and out of the hospital.
He was
couple of
must-
years.
Yeah, he must have been diagnosed well before I went on my mission, but I didn't know what was going on. But on my missionary farewell, he was in the hospital, but they let him go from the hospital to come to my missionary farewell, and he came to my farewell and spoke, and Mom spoke. Sorry, that's all I'm saying. Then within just, you know, right after the funeral, then I went back to the mission field.
You had a guy come
yeah.
home with you. What was his name?
Jack.
Jack.
Who?
He
His
come
name
home
was
with
Jack,
Jordan.
and that's all I can remember about his name. But he was
Well,
he was a strange person.
They found out, actually, to go way back, when Dad first went to Las Vegas, I found this out after he was in the hospital with this cancer, but he had testicular cancer, and they removed one testicle, and they assumed it lay dormant till the wreck, or maybe around that time. That's when they found out he had cancer. And they started with the colostomy, and then they just kept cutting higher and higher. Actually, Dad starved to death because they just kept going up so much higher. Food he just couldn't absorb any food. And he had one of the first colostomies that they ever performed in Idaho Falls, and it was a mess. They didn't have the stuff to stick to the skin, you know, and a drain, and that was not a pleasant deal at all.
So was your dad always active in the church?
Never. He was, the story I was told, you know, he went on a mission to Tasmania. He thought he would come home, and his grandfather owned 10,000 acres of ground up around Canyon Creek. But while he was on his mission, he divorced Grandma Pirro. Is that when he divorced her?
It must have been about that time.
Then he remarried a lady that had 6 kids and passed away. When Dad got home from his mission, he got an inheritance of $140. That's all he got on all that ground. And he blamed it on the stake president. And he never went. The only time I ever saw him in a chapel again was when Gordon went on Gordon's farewell. It's the only time I had ever saw him in church again.
At the end of his mission in Australia, he married a girl from Australia, Bonnie Chick.
Yeah.
And he brought her back to the
Bonnie Lee.
Bonnie
Lees.
Lees, L-E-E-S.
Yeah.
Bonnie Lees. And they had 2 boys here, Bud and Taz. And my understanding is that Bonnie took the 2 boys and went back to Australia and never came back.
She was just she got homesick, and she was just going to go home for a visit. But she thought she was coming to the States and live a wealthy life. And it didn't happen. They lived in a little old farmhouse that was next to nothing in Newdale.
Is that because your dad thought he was coming home to 10,000 acres?
Yeah, and but he rented some ground just this side of Newdale. I remember seeing the house. You remember where the house was where you were born up there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You were born in Rexburg. But
Yeah, but he lived there.
yeah.
But that was, that was Mom. But anyway, yeah, he after Bonnie went back, he quit. He would farm in the summertime, and then he had that Blue Notes dance band. He'd go to California, play all winter long, and that's how he met Mom. He was playing at a dance over here at Ryrie Pavilion.
So he wasn't active in the church all the time I knew him, but I'm pretty certain he never lost his testimony.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Why do you say that?
Because once in a while he'd have to straighten out one of us.
Yeah, yeah, and his lifestyle was nightclubs, and that's how he knew how to make a profession. It wasn't how to make a living. I mean, and he smoked. He didn't feel comfortable about going to church, but I'm like Gordon. I felt like he still knew that the gospel was true. He just didn't choose to live it, or couldn't. But he felt like that's how he made his living, so it wasn't right to.
So it was your mom that took you to church?
Yeah. Well, when we lived in Las Vegas, we never went to church. I never went to primary in my younger years. The only time we went to church is when we come home and lived with Grandma and Grandpa Reed. Did you go to church in Vegas?
Not
Yeah,
that I ever
that's
remember.
why I
In
say-
fact,
That's why
No.
I say Uncle Gil saved their lives.
Yeah, Gail and Grandpa Reed.
my only real introduction to the church is when we lived over there on South Capitol, and I was in the 8th grade, or the 3rd grade rather, so I was about 8 years old. And Bishop Hatch was the bishop, and he had a daughter named Beulah Jane Hatch, and she invited me to primary. And I loved primary. It was on a weekday, and I just loved going to primary.
Well, Mom taught young women's
Did she?
when we lived on Capitol. She was in young women's. I remember blessing the sacrament in the old First Ward. I remember shaking President Kimball's hand he come to a state conference there at the. There was a chapel there by the hospital. I went to church because that's where the nurses went. Loma went to church there, didn't she? But I remember President Kimball. He wasn't president then, but he came and spoke, and I remember shaking his hand.
So you went to church. You started going to church mainly when you came up here and lived with.
Yeah, that's
Grandma
the only
and Grandpa
time
Reed.
Rex and I went to church is
That's
when
why I
we
said.
up here with Grandma and
he saved
Grandpa.
their life.
We'd ride over with Uncle Gale, and he was always late because he had to milk cows. Remember him running a stop sign one time, going to church, and the cop stopped him because he run a stop sign. He was late for church, and he was in the Bishopric.
But at some point, you stopped going to Grandma and Grandpa Reed's house, and you had to.
Well, yeah,
On
then
your own,
we
make a
lived on
decision.
Capitol, and I went to church because that's where the student nurses went.
But how old were you?
Well,
How old were you when you had interest in the student nurses?
I had just barely started dating Marion
The cat is.
when I graduated from high school. Marion went to my graduation, and I think it was only our second date. She was 2.5 years older than me.
But
They always said they robbed the cradle. So did Loma. She robbed the cradle
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
but your mom started going back to church once
Yeah.
you moved to Idaho Falls.
Yeah, and and that's probably she started to go to the old first ward when we lived on Capitol.
And how old were you then when you moved back here? Tell me.
Well, when we lived on Capitol, actually, that's when I was in the 7th grade. But I don't remember going to church till I started working at the hospital. Rex got me a job at the hospital when I was a sophomore.
Yeah.
Rex worked in the kitchen, and he got me a job in the pharmacy, working for Homer. And that's when I started chasing the nurses, and I was awful young, but I did. I had a little 54, had a set of
Can I
pipes
say-
on it, and the pharmacy looked out over the river at that time. I'd look out there some days, and there went my car. The nurses used it as I just left the keys on it. They could take it whenever they wanted to. I looked out many times, and it was going down the road. They would use it to go downtown shopping.
But I get the impression that Uncle Gordon had a different church experience than you guys, because you.
Yeah, there's 4 years difference between Gary and I, so these two were pretty close, and I was supposed to be a girl, and I was a big disappointment to my mother.
Oh, really? I
I didn't know that.
I don't remember that.
Why do you say that?
She's let me know that the rest of my life.
Oh, really? I don't remember that.
I don't think so. What'd she say?
She wanted a little girl so bad. She had these two
Well,
boys, and I
that's-
came along, and I was another dang boy.
That's why we were able to get the money so fast to get Karen, because Mom wanted a girl.
Is that right?
In fact, I never saw Karen. Marion come over to the pharmacy building where I studied all the time when I was a junior, and that was my big year. My junior year was my big year. And said, let's adopt a girl. And I said, hell no. And 2 days later, she'd already got a hold of Mom, borrowed the money, and had taken her home. That's the first time I saw Karen, because Mom come up and went with Marion to bring her home from the hospital. And I come home from school, and there was Karen. And that, Mom says, I want a girl.
That was the
So
first
Marion
girl in
knew
the
that all
family.
she had to do was call Grandma, and Grandma loaned us, I think it was $500. That's all it cost us to get Karen. That was a lawyer fee, that was a whole 9 yards. It was just meant to be so, because Marion helped deliver her.
Yeah.
But we had her sealed to us within 3 months, bringing her home from the hospital. Well, she was only 3 days old or 2 when Marion brought her home from the hospital. Yeah,
My experience was different than those two.
Yeah. Elaborate on that a little bit more, because it's all I've heard
Well,
is.
they were so much older than me that we weren't really buddies and friends growing
Yeah,
up. I
that's
was
right.
pretty much on my own, I think.
Yeah, he was riding a bike around.
So,
He rode a
so
motorbike.
my experience of becoming active in the church
I
and going
remember
on a
that.
mission was, a lot of it was through the friends that I ran around with. So I would go to the Idaho Falls 5th Ward with them, but we lived in the 24th Ward.
Yeah.
And
Well, you
And
left
they-
from the 5th Ward on your mission, didn't you?
yeah, this was the
And these
5th
were
Ward that
friends
sent
from
me
high
on my
school?
mission.
Were these friends from high school or from?
Yeah,
These are guys that he's still friends with.
yeah. There were 6 of us, and 3 of them are now dead. And there's 3 of us left. But anyway, the way that, so so I went to church with them, and then when it come time to go to college, I went to Rick's College. And of course, when you go to church college, one of the first classes you take is the Book of Mormon. And I don't remember exactly when it happened during taking the Book of Mormon class, but the Spirit witness so strong that it was all true and I needed to go on a mission. And so I went to work and made the arrangements to go on a mission. So nobody expected it, and nobody had prompted it. It was Heavenly Father just rescued me, that's all.
And when did you find out? So it was possibly your parents not paying for your mission, or you paying for your mission. It was uncles and aunts. Tell me
I
about.
think, they were having those hard times then, and
They supported him
in
up
fact,
until the wreck.
you hear about sending a boy on a mission and things going so great for the parents. It was hell for my parents. They went and had that accident, and Dad got cancer and died, and yeah, I learned someplace along the way that it was pretty much all the aunts and uncles chipping in to support my mission. Back in the days when we did it that way, when you had to provide for yourself.
I've got a question about your mom. So, how did she feel about your dad's inactivity in the church when she? I get the impression she wanted to be active herself, but he wasn't.
I don't
How'd that
know if
play
there was
out?
a conflict there. I don't remember a conflict there. It could have been, but I don't. It was never. I don't ever remember. Do you?
I only remember just maybe 1 or 2 comments long after Dad had passed on that was not the marriage she expected. And that's, I think, all I ever heard
Well-
about her about it.
She married Dad. He was 10 years older, But Mom was the oldest, and Grandma was sick all the time. And Mom just wanted out of the house, and I don't know if they really loved each other at the time, but I'm sure they did. But at the time they got married, I don't think that was the case. She just wanted out of the house.
Out of the house because she was having to take care of.
She took care of Grandma and took care of the babies. And this Grandma had babies, and she was always sick in bed. And until the day, when Mary and I lived across the street, Marion learned that she did not come home. That was when she was working home help. She did not come home and tell Grandma about a case she'd been on, because the next day Grandma had that same disease.
Oh, wow.
And Marion was always over there taking care of Grandma constantly. Grandma always had this problem or that problem. And I talked to Dr. LeVar Withers almost every day, trying to decide what we were going to pill we were going to give Grandma. And he'd call me, says, "I don't know what to do with her, Gary." I said, "Well, let's try." And back then there was a drug called Darvon, which was pain medicine. It's not available on the market anymore. And that's what we used more than anything else, because it wasn't a narcotic, and it's kind of betwixt and between, but it's not made anymore. But yeah, Var and I talked an awful lot. Bless her heart, she always had an ailment.
The thing I remember about Grandma Reed is you knew she really loved you.
Yeah.
You know, I was just a little kid, but boy, you knew Grandma Reed loved you.
I've got a question about that because when all I remember that exact same thing is the unconditional love, but I remember a huge cookie jar
Oh,
in
sugar
her house.
cookies.
Did that cookie jar exist when you guys
Oh,
were
yeah.
young too?
It was
Grandma
always
sugar
full of cookies. And the other thing, I could go shoot a pheasant. Rex and I we were up here hunting with some guys, and we found somebody had shot an elk, and it was so full of holes. But we took it home, and Grandma cleaned it and cooked it for us. I mean, I'd shoot pheasants, ducks, whatever. Grandma cooked it for me. She didn't. Yes, she was sickly a lot, but she'd always get up and cook Grandpa mush for breakfast, and we'd go out and skin the can.
What is mush?
considered oatmeal?
Cooked cereal. It was.
Cooked
She would put.
cereal.
What was it? Oats. She'd put it on the stove the night before to soak, to soften up.
Yeah.
And then the next morning we'd go skin the cream off the milk can, and Grandpa would have that on straight cream. But it was good. I loved it.
Cream of wheat.
Wasn't that a cracked wheat?
Did you like that, Dad?
I know Dad.
He won't eat
won't
oatmeal today.
Yeah, you don't like oatmeal.
That's probably why he won't eat oatmeal.
I thought the term mush was like a cracked wheat situation.
It was
that
cracked
wasn't
wheat.
oatmeal. That was a
Cracked wheat.
yes.
Yeah, it was cracked wheat, and that's why Grandma would put it on the stove at night to soak.
You had to soak and soften the wheat.
Yeah,
You see.
and that was Grandpa's breakfast. I don't know, she may have cooked eggs and whatnot too, but that I remember the mush and I went out and skimmed the cream off the can many times for him.
Hey Craig, do you remember Dad? I remember Dad used to eat milk.
Red milk,
bread
yeah,
all
that
the
was
time.
Grandpa's
Bread milk.
Bread milk.
Grandma and Grandpa
red
Reed's.
milk, yeah.
Bread milk and sugar on lettuce.
Oh,
Lettuce.
Yeah.
Sugar on
Take
that.
a crisp
good, the
lettuce
salt on
leaf and put
watermelon.
sugar on it.
Iceberg lettuce.
Grandpa liked that.
So,
So I remember
since we're talking about Grandma and Grandpa Reed, talk to us about the family reunions that you remember at their house and stuff.
They were fun. Always had huge big meals, and after the meals, the guys would all go outside and play ball, and the women cleaned up, washed the dishes.
Played with our cousins, learned to love our cousins.
Yeah, we really, I mean, those were times, everybody come to Grandma and Grandpa Reed's. And I remember if somebody else showed up, we didn't know it coming, we went out and chopped another head off a chicken, and we would, and Grandma would cook it. You just, I mean, that's where everybody come to eat, was Grandma and Grandpa Reed's.
And this was a
All of
monthly
it.
thing, or
Once a month. Every month.
Well, every month we always had a get together,
Family
that
meeting.
Yeah,
fast
get
Sunday
together.
evening.
Sunday, fast Sunday every month.
Yeah, we had we'd sing and scriptures. And
That was our
Yeah.
second date.
that's where I took all my first girlfriends. I had to take them up there to, in fact, I was dating Mary Ann Larson, and then quit dating her, and then Marion come along, and she was called Mary Ann for a long time.
well, that's where I took Cindy the first time I met Cindy.
second date.
Second date.
Yeah.
And Cindy never forgets that, from what Uncle Gale did to her and what Grandma and Grandpa,
Well-
how Grandma and Grandpa were.
Grandma Reed.
Yeah, I mean, you just felt at home
She had
there,
so
and
much
that,
I
and it,
couldn't believe.
Grandma's siblings, not so much Grandpa's. Grandpa's family weren't members of the church. They didn't. Oh, Uncle Bill never
It-
did join.
I thought they fell away. Didn't they have a falling out?
There's a story about that, and I can't remember exactly. I really remember reading it, but yeah,
So do I.
they had a falling out, and
In
none
Utah.
Of none of the sons, none of Grandpa's siblings joined the church. Grandpa did in later life, and Uncle Bill, he supported his family, but he never joined. But and Grandpa supported his family. He finally did join. But there was John. What was the one that lived down in Louisville? Grandpa's brother lived down in, not Louisville, Lorenzo.
Well, he didn't join.
He didn't join, but what was his name? And then there was one that moved out to Seattle. And Gordon's
There's a John Reed that
Gordon's son, Uncle Claire had Gordon's son go to the cemetery and find his grave.
yes,
And he was mad at everybody and moved out to Seattle.
that was John Reed.
That was John Reed, yeah.
How old were Grandma and Grandpa when they were finally sealed?
You know, Grandpa was 60 something. It was 1966 when they all went to Temple and they were sealed.
And that was the same year I married Larry Jean, and that's when I was sealed to Mom and Dad.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, Mom and Dad were never married in the Temple, not until, like Gordon said, Mom and Dad were both passed away, and we had their work then.
Well, I was actually talking about Grandma and Grandpa Reed.
Yeah, I know.
So how old were they when, I mean, he was later in life when he was baptized,
and I
and they
think
were
that
sealed,
was-
is that right?
Wasn't that 1966?
I don't know when Grandpa
I know he was in
joined
his
and when
60s.
they
He was in
were
his
sealed.
60s before he was finally baptized. I think Uncle Gale's one that baptized. Maybe it was Uncle Claire, but I'm not sure. But then, you know, since he was baptized, why then they were all at the temple and were sealed.
But the family reunions go way back beyond.
Yeah, it was the Armstrongs, and then we had Armstrong reunions. Every year, up the 4-H camp up by
Alpine.
Alpine.
I do remember the Alpine.
I mean, that was the big thing, and everybody came. It was so fun.
That was an
And
Armstrong
sing,
reunion?
yeah, and we'd sing and sing and sing.
I do remember the Alpine. I remember going there.
Yeah, the Armstrongs sang, so did the Reeds too, but yeah, after the Armstrongs got so big, then we started having Reed reunions. Then we kind of got away from having reunions. It was
I do
sad
remember that.
because it was fun. We got as cousins. That's why we were, you know, you see your cousins. We knew each other. We played together, and it was because of those reunions. A lot of fun. We'd
So-
play horseshoes, and play ball, and I remember Sid Withers would always crash out on something when he was playing ball, get hurt. He was always hyper.
So I have a question for you. Since today was Uncle Gale's funeral, I'm wondering if you have a favorite memory from Uncle Gale that you could share with us. Anything
think-
come to mind?
You got something in mind, Rex? I keep talking and I want you to.
Yeah. Just knowing that we were going to be with him in the summer.
That's with me. I can't think of anything specific. We just knew he was there for us. I mean, it was just a given. I can't think of a specific thing. I remember, you know, as young as we were, Gail and Glenn and Uncle Bertus would take us hunting. That's how we learned how to do things with them.
How to fish and all that too.
And I was too young. I didn't get to participate in that part of my uncle's.
Yeah. So I'll segue into this question. He told me that when you guys moved back to Ryrie, and you were maybe not back to where you were living in Ryrie, you were really small, and he was working in the nightclub, and he would try and sleep, and you were just young kids. You'd get up in the morning and make a lot of noise.
Dad.
Oh, our
And
dad,
he-
yeah.
He didn't like that.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Because Uncle Gale told me that he heard about that, and that's when he came to you guys, and he'd pick you up at the house and bring you to his up to the farm when you were really young. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember ever being hit by Dad, but I was scared of him. And Uncle Gale
He
come pick
was
us up.
very hard to get acquainted with.
Yeah,
The,
and you know, I thought about that later on in life, and this is what I come up with. You think about back when Dad was married to Bonnie, and Bud and Taz, and they lived up there in Newville. And let's see, Bud was 5, Taz was 3. She took those boys back to Tasmania. Imagine what he felt like. I mean, that's just an age when you really. I think Dad was afraid to feel that strong again to the 3 of us because he was.
That'd been a terrible hurt.
Yeah, he was hurt so bad when she went back to Tasmania and took Bud and Taz. I didn't know I had brothers, except Bud used to send me, I had a stamp collection, Bud would send me stamps. That's kind of the first I remember anything, but the first I really remember was Dad going to Seattle and picking up Bud. And then he just kind of fit right in. And then when he went to pick up Taz, Rex and I were unloading a load of spuds over town for Uncle Gale. And Dad had gone to Seattle and picked up Taz and brought him up. And Taz just jumped up on the back of that truck and
Went to work.
he just started unloading. He went, there's spuds with us, like he'd been there forever. Sorry. I mean, it's just like you knew him. It was just like he was all your brother. He just stepped in and started. We would rotate around, picking up a sack and dumping it in the air, and he just stepped in and started helping us unload.
How old was he then?
They had to come back before they was 18 in order to keep their citizenship.
Well, 21.
Was it 21?
Yeah, it had to be. He had to sit.
Yeah, I guess it would be 21.
So why Gale is so unusual? Why was it Uncle Gale that you guys were drawn to instead of one of the other brothers?
I think it was more as he was drawn to us as a protector, the
yeah,
father
he saved
figure.
their lives.
Uncle Gale always had a strong testimony, and I think he's the one that took us to church, and you know, Grandpa didn't. Uncle Gale would pick up Grandma. Anyway, yeah, he was just always.
So he just saw a need and
I think so.
fulfilled it.
I think so. You know, Bobby was telling that story. That was funny. I was just working out here in the shed, and I thought, I drove over to the river every once in a while, and something just said, go to the river. I drove up, and here was Bobby trying to get Donnie up on the deck and Gail up on the deck, and I drove down in and said, hey, I get Marion out of the boat this way, it's easier.
Yeah, he
And
was,
then one other time that happened, and Gail started calling me one of the 3 Nephites. I just, something else, I can't remember what else happened. It wasn't me, it was Gail. You know, I was just the recipient of going to help, but a couple of times I just showed up and he needed help. And poor Bobby, he was beside himself trying to get those 2, because Don would get up on the deck and then he'd fall back in the boat. And Gail would try and get up and roll. And anyway, just fortunate that I showed up at that time.
does everybody know how we met?
Yeah, tell us about that, Dad.
She chased me.
I did not think so.
Tell us about that, Dad.
Gosh, it'd take me a month to tell you.
I only got 3 days.
Well, you know that there was from the kitchen in the hospital, there was a tunnel that led over to the nurse's home. And that's where some of the food was stored over there.
In the basement of the dormitory.
I don't know, I just caught a glimpse of Loma and that was it.
No, he would, after school, he would go over to the hospital, to the kitchen. And in order to get all the supplies, there was a tunnel to go through where the nurses could go through the tunnel and then didn't have to go out of in the weather and go to the hospital. There was a tunnel. And so if you didn't want to go outside, you go through the tunnel to go to work.
But the kitchen was in the basement right there too.
And that's where the
However-
kitchen was.
Tell the truth now. They had a curfew, and Rex and I had keys. I had a storage room over there, and Rex had a storage. We had keys so we could let the girls. When they were, when
Wait
they
a
were
second.
Past,
Back up. Back up. Hold on.
Keys to the nursing home? Is that
Wait a
There's
second.
letting the back.
You had keys.
we had keys to get to the storage room over there, and that's how the girls were able to get back into the hospital after curfew.
To the dorm.
The dorm, because they lived in the dorm. They lived in that. That was where they lived.
So you opened the doors for them? You gave them the key? Or
No,
I know. I opened the door a couple of times. Did you?
no.
You did.
Not that he'll admit.
Dad's just not gonna admit it.
That must have been just you and Marion. I don't remember that.
oh, that's awesome.
Well, the storage room for the pharmacy was right next to Rex's
Yeah.
storage room for the food. And we would trade out. He'd get a storage come in, and we would throw the boxes to me. One of us throw at each other, and we'd stack, and that's how we stacked those
And he
boxes of.
knew when the nurses was going to go over have dinner. He worked after school or go over there and eat in the kitchen.
Well, whenever
So
there
he
was a new
planted
class, we
himself.
checked them all out. That's.
The hat. So all of these.
I mean, we're young, but we
these
weren't
kids
dumb.
were funny.
That's my uncle, Gary. I love that. But Dad, you met Mom when you were, what, 12? How old were you? 17?
Well,
I was 11.
No, you were 17? How old were you when you met Mom?
I was probably 17.
yeah, we knew each other for 3 years. We got married when I was 21 and he was 19. And he was the only person I ever dated. I didn't ever have a date in school when I was in high school.
Well, you had to wait for the perfect one.
I had one date and never showed up. So he's the only guy I ever dated.
What about the dances?
Oh, we went dancing. Yeah, there were dances.
There were dances at
There were
the nursing home.
in this nurses in the dormitory.
Yeah,
They had dances.
those were fun.
Yeah.
Marion had her knee operated on, so she danced very well. But
So,
that's why I never learned how to dance. But
so
we
tell
would
us,
try.
tell us about how you met Aunt Marion and that whole courtship.
Well, let's go back to
But Rex said he's telling his
Rex
story.
Oh.
and Loma. So he graduated from high school in Idaho, and I graduated from nursing school, and he was only 19. He was only 19. So this is what's kind of funny. Probably most of you know. But I was working in the, at the time I was in the,
You worked for Dr. Towles when you graduated.
yeah, but I was working in the children's room.
Pediatrics.
Pediatrics. One day,
Sister
I was
Mrs.
working.
Lewis, huh?
and he came, and I had his ring, his high school ring on my finger. And he came in and he wanted me to give it back to him. And I said, okay. Gave it back to him. I was still working in pediatrics when he came back and wanted to know if he'd take it back. If I would take his ring back. We used to work from 7 to 11. No, we worked 8-hour shifts. Now it's 12-hour shifts. And so I took it and went back to work.
It was all on the same day.
Uh-huh. And I found out he wanted to go out with another student.
Is this true, Dad?
Yeah.
Do you remember any of this?
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna
Rex,
say, do
you
remember
play
any
or
of this?
you?
Yeah. So tell him why you wanted me to take it back.
Because this other girl had bad breath.
I think you just made that story up.
That's really funny. So I took it back.
So you probably had to be kissing on this other girl to know that she had bad breath.
Honestly, Craig, I think he just made that story up.
That's funny. But that's what
I've heard that
happened.
story for 40 years.
So we knew each other for 3 years before we got married.
Oh, that's funny.
How did you meet Larry Jean, Gordon? Gordon, how did you meet Larry Jean?
Oh, well, I was preparing to go on the mission, and I had been dating another girl for probably a year, but I think we were kind of on the outs when I decided to go on a mission. And so I decided about the last month I decided my goal is to date a different girl every night until I go on my mission.
There you go.
Sounds like a Graham.
And,
There you go.
Exactly.
and I was running out of girls, and
Running out of girls.
my good friend Lynn Harker was going with a girl named Susan Wallace. And Susan said, I know a girl that you could go out with. And so it was about a week before I left on my mission. I went out with Larry Jean. Our first date was we went to some activity at the church at her ward. Her folks weren't active in the church, and none of her brothers and sisters was, but she was. Well, you know, for a time, her mother was and taught primary and that sort of thing, and her mom and dad had been married in the temple, but after the temple marriage, he never went back to church. He just wanted to marry her and married, got himself ready to marry in the temple. But he too, it was always his church, even though he didn't go to church. He was always very protective of the church. But anyway, so that was our first date. And I think I went out with her maybe once or twice after that before I left on the mission. And then she wrote me every week for the whole mission. And this other girl was writing me too. And somewhere along the line, I decided, this isn't fair to somebody. And so I told the other girl, there's no point in writing me anymore. Boy, I heard about that when I got back by her mother. Says, you're the one who jilted my daughter.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, so after I got back from the mission, we started going out again, and we dated for about a year, and then my mother said, you really should marry that girl, and so I did.
Tell them where she worked or got her training.
She was the X-ray technician over at the hospital.
I mean, it was in the blood. I mean, it was just.
So, back up one second. Did you say part of your mission preparation was to date as many girls as you could? I don't think
Well,
this was church approved.
I knew I
Uncle
wasn't
Gordon.
going to be able to date any girls for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's in the church manual. Mission prep is to date.
Probably not. But it was fun.
And you were in Idaho Falls at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll-
I know we talked about Dad and Uncle Gordon, how they met their wives. I'd like to hear about Gary. And
You've all heard how Grandma and I met. Mary and I did, haven't you?
it was probably at the hospital.
Well, of course, no doubt.
She was
Actually-
in nursing school too.
I was working at a pharmacy, and she was a student nurse, and we were doing inventory. And of course, there were three that had my eye on, but Mary stuck out. Anyway, I had her come into the pharmacy and help me do inventory. That time we had to count all the pills. That's when I got up enough courage to ask her out. Like I say, I was just about out of high school for our second date was actually she come to my high school graduation and she gave me a watch.
How old was she then?
She was student nurse when she come into the pharmacy, but
She was older,
she's 2.5 years older than I am.
2.5.
About the same as your mom. So, yeah, and that's when I first asked her out.
And how long did you guys date until you got married?
I'd been to college for a year.
So a year or two.
So, and let's see, I had just barely turned 20 in March. We were married in June, so I was just barely 20 years old. She had already graduated from nurses training when we got married.
And how long after you were married did you have David?
Oh, a long time.
A whole
What,
9
about
months.
3 years?
3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
Very good. And Darren's 2 years behind David?
3.
3. And then Karen is how many years behind?
3.
Three,
There's 3
3 and
between
3?
all 8 of us.
Very good.
And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I didn't date a whole bunch of girls. I didn't.
I don't believe that.
Only 2 or 3 nurses before that.
How tell
Something
me
about the nursing. Rex started it. It's all his fault.
So, why did the two families not jive?
What 2 families?
The Grahams and the Andersons in Teton.
Well, because Grandpa Anderson knew our dad. And he told Marion, you can't date him, he's a Graham. Grahams did not have a very good reputation in Teton.
Really?
They were womanizers.
because of your dad?
No, because
No.
my grandpa was a
Not our
grandpa.
dad, it was
Oh, your
It was
grandpa.
Grandpa Roy.
Grandpa
Oh.
Roy, and also I understand great grandpa Francis.
Yeah.
Oh, details. I didn't know this.
I didn't know this.
You know, the funny, really one of the funny things, Brigham Young, you probably heard this story many times. Brigham Young sent 8 men to Moody Creek to see if it could be homesteaded.
Wait a second. Where's Moody Creek? What is that?
East
Well,
of Rexburg.
Teton, up by Teton.
Okay.
Out of those 8 men, one of them was our great-great-grandfather and his brother, and one of them was Marion's grandfather, great-grandfather. So we were and the property that Marion grew up on, her mother's parents bought from Grandpa Francis. Anyway, I've got the deed upstairs that they signed when they bought that property from great-grandpa Reed, Grandpa Graham.
So your grandfather, through your dad's line, they had a reputation up in Newdale of being womanizers?
Yeah, but there was another brother named Claude Graham, who was also apparently had the same reputation.
Wow.
Yeah, Marion's dad was not. I didn't win him over until went out one time to help him start spuds. First watering on the spuds, and he used those little siphon tubes about this big.
Yeah.
And I helped him start those, and we got it all started in a hurry. Anyway, that's when he changed his mind. He decided I could work and whatever. Anyway, until I had to shoot his favorite horse, and that was Uncle Gordon's fault.
Oh, that was one of the worst experiences of our lives.
One of the worst experiences I ever did. Have to go home and tell him that I had to shoot his favorite horse.
What happened?
What happened?
We went hunting actually with Linda's first husband, Steve. It was Steve and his brother and Gordon and I went archery hunting up Palisades, and I had borrowed Pat, who was Grandpa's favorite horse. And we'd gone up and camped, and then we were getting on the horses to go up the next morning.
We were going up, and it was a pretty steep place, and the pack I had tied on behind the saddle was coming loose, and so I got off to tighten it up, and something spooked that horse, and it took off running down that mountain, stepped in a hole, and broke its leg.
And there we were with bows and arrows. So I sent Steve down to the road to find us a gun to shoot that horse.
No, I went down I took somebody's horse, maybe it was yours. I went down and found somebody.
Oh, you went down?
Looking for somebody with a gun so we could put that horse out of his misery. And I found somebody from Idaho Falls, and he had a .22.
Single shot.
Oh no.
Right. So, and he didn't know who I was from Adam, but he turned that .22 over to me, and I took it back up to where Gary was, and Gary got in front of that horse and shot it right there, and nothing happened.
Not a thing. That horse just shook his head. So then I stepped off the side and clipped him right behind the ear with a .22.
Yeah.
He just dropped.
He went down like a rock then.
And I was back up there hunting 2 or 3 years later. That horse's leg was broken 5 places.
Anyway,
We just took the saddle off, and
that was one of the great
that was the end
tragedies
of the
of our
hunt trip.
lives.
Wow.
I forgot you had gone down after the gun, but that's
And tell me about when you disclosed that fact to your.
oh man, that was the
Grandpa.
hardest thing I ever did. I went up with Marion to Grandpa Anderson and telling him about it. Actually, Grandpa Anderson had a quick temper, and everything was my hell almighty. But you know what? He didn't explode at that time. He was really pretty good about it. And Gordon and I felt terrible. We camped up there for a couple of days after that,
Yeah,
getting
about a
enough
week.
courage to come home.
He didn't want to come back.
No, we didn't. I didn't want to go tell, because it was a
Favorite
beautiful horse, and it was Grandpa's pride and joy. Yeah, it was a sad hunt.
Mary, I remember when the flood was in Marion's parents' house.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, I was right up here changing water when David rode his bike up to
I
get me
rode my bike. You and
and tell
Dave
me
were
the
up here.
Teton Dam had broke.
The
Why
Teton
did you
Dam?
ride your bike all the way up here?
Darren did.
I rode my bike. You two were up here.
Oh, we were up changing
I
water.
rode my bike up here from.
Why didn't Mom bring you up instead of
'Cause
sending
I
you up
think
with the
she
bike?
was on the phone trying to get a hold of someone.
Oh,
She was trying to figure out where Barbara was, where Grandma was. She said, "Get up there and tell your dad to get home."
we took that pickup and
Red pickup.
went across the bridge. Then we went back up on the dry farms, and
You talking about the Teton
Yeah.
Dam?
that's when
again?
Teton Dam
Yeah.
broke. We went
Okay.
across the back, and we actually come out of Moody Creek, and then we come in the back way to Grandma and Grandpa's house. We got down there on the front porch, and the whole area from there clear over to St. Anthony, you could just see,
Yeah,
Mud.
and it was
just like a,
Debris.
it was I don't know what was coming off the
like
water,
electric.
chemicals or something, but it
electric,
was spooky to where Karen started to cry, and so we turned around and took her back out farther, and then we walked back up to Grandma and Grandpa's house. But after that, these
Didn't that-
guys and Marion would get beds and whatnot from the DI in Idle Falls, and they would haul it across there up to people up to Teton and Newdale.
But didn't
Man,
that
you did that a
affect-
lot of times, didn't you guys?
Didn't that affect Marion's home?
No,
No, there was
It
water
it just
on the
barely
front.
missed it. Her
Just-
that home was sitting up on a hill. It got almost up to the steps, and it went over the bridge, but it never got up to their house.
Yeah,
What year was that?
76.
76.
76, yeah.
I was down in Mesa, the Mesa in 69.
That was such a weird feeling.
They
See
never
that,
looked at that.
and we watched. There was a chapel, Wilford Church. You could see the water hit that chapel and bust right through it, the center and out the other side from where we were sitting.
Following up,
But
well,
it's just an
following
eerie,
up with that,
eerie feeling. It was spooky.
because Aunt Barbara's house, you could see it from Grandma's. I mean, when it was there, but after the flood, we would go out to where Aunt Barbara's foundation was, and just work downstream, finding some of their stuff. We found their piano in a willow tree, probably 10, 15 feet in the air. But we found a lot of their stuff just scattered out. I mean, out in the fields, out in the middle of nowhere, just followed downstream from where their house was.
Grandpa had a little, was it case tractor, hooked onto a sprinkler pump. Never did find that tractor
No.
pump, did they?
Yeah, that was down off the hill on the river.
I don't, the animals were killed, it was awful. This was
Well,
terrible.
Uncle Weldon and Aunt Carol Sue, there was a lumber yard a bunch of miles ahead, above their ground, and all those big timber come down and the water dropped in their yard, and all that stuff settled right down in their yard. They had to get big trucks and whatnot to get that stuff hauled out of there. Yeah, that was not a fun thing
And
either.
it's all built
They ruined
up
my
again.
pickup driving across the rough old roads up. Who was? Oh, it was. Who was the orthodontist?
Hillam.
Hillam. Harold Hillam was the stake president, who was Grandma's old
Grandma's
boyfriend from high school.
boyfriends.
But he would write a work order for the DI, and then these guys and Grandma would go get it and haul it up to Teton. I had to work.
I have an alibi question back on
Give me time to get a real good alibi.
with your with Bud and Taz. It just dawned on me that Bud came back, but Taz didn't.
Yeah, they both
Did
come
later.
back.
They both
They
come back,
both
but,
came back.
They
but
come.
Taz went. Oh, that's right. Taz ended up on the East Coast.
He was home for what, about a year,
Right.
and then he joined the army.
Right.
Bud joined the Navy.
Bud joined the Navy.
Okay. Yeah, I knew
Actually,
Bud.
Taz was in the reserve or in some kind of military in Tasmania. He had, I don't know.
He had an uncle that was in the reserves.
But didn't he serve in some kind of reserve or something down there?
Yeah, he did.
But anyway, Taz just about didn't come over. The story I got, Taz had decided not to come, and the ship had left Hobart, which is the bottom of Tasmania. He changed his mind. The ship had gone around the top part, which is Launceston. He rode his motorcycle across the island and caught the ship, and I think he just left his motorcycle there and got on the ship and come to the States. Is that?
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I think
I think
remember
that's.
that.
I don't know if you give the motorbike to somebody. He lived on the beaches of Tasmania on a motorcycle racing. That was his thing. But he almost didn't come back over, and they had to do that to keep their citizenship.
Well, I remember when we lived in New York, we went to visit Dallas. He lived
Yeah,
in,
when we went to pick David up from
remember that,
mission.
Dad? Well, we went to visit Taz and her family
Yeah.
in Baltimore, I think it was.
Oh, really?
Remember that?
Well, they lived out there when we got married.
Remember when we lived in New York and we went to go visit Taz and his family that lived
It was somewhere in Washington, D.C.
somewhere in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was stationed in Washington.
Yeah.
He was stationed at the Pentagon.
They had a home in Alexandria.
You're right. Okay. Yeah, I do remember visiting their family.
And then when we picked up David in mission, he was building a home West Virginia, up in the hills of West Virginia.
And that was our first time ever meeting. I just graduated high school, and Dave was just off his mission. That's the first time we met any of those,
Yeah.
any of that family.
Yeah, when he
But
retired,
Bud
he built that
Bud and
place in
Taz
West
both
Virginia.
only stayed home for. Taz was in Australia. It was class system. If you were lower class, you didn't go to college. You become a tradesperson. Bud became a baker, and Taz became a carpenter. And they both did that when they come over here, and then that was. Taz was about ready to get drafted, or was it Bud? Anyway, they joined the service. Both of them joined. Bud joined the Navy, and Taz joined the Army. And Taz, he started as a grunt, went to OCS. He became an officer the hard way.
He retired a full colonel.
Yeah,
Is that right?
Oh, wow.
Oh,
he
Bud
spent
tells
3
a funny
tours in Nam.
Bud tells a funny story about how he wound up being a baker instead of going on to school. Over there, when he took algebra, the teacher said, you know, you can make X stand for anything you want, or letters stand for anything you want. So when the test came along, he just wrote down letters and these stand for the answers. And they decided he wasn't smart enough to go on to school. So they assigned him to become a baker. And then after he got out of the Navy, he went to the University of Utah and got a degree in electrical engineering and worked for IBM, and then he worked for Memorex.
Wow.
Decided he
But
wasn't smart enough.
he sent his high school principal, was it, a graduation card to his graduation
Oh,
from
wow.
college
Classic.
as a slap in the face.
In your face. In your face.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so Bud was really active in the church, right?
Yeah,
Was
Bud.
Taz?
really
Was Taz?
No,
Taz was not.
More money than he,
when they were down there,
and his wife was happy.
it was almost beat into him, and Bud accepted it, and Taz rebelled. Taz was kind of a rebel.
In Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rex kind of kept him a rebel when he got over here a little bit.
But both,
Huh.
both Bud and Taz said that their life in Australia, when their mother married a fellow by the name of Chick, Bud and Taz being the stepchildren, their life was miserable
Oh,
the whole time, and they kicked them out. when
Well,
they were
yeah,
like
Dad would
7.
send money, but those two guys never saw any of it. This guy kept the money. And they were kicked out of the house when they were teenagers. Uh,
So,
yeah, they were, and I think that's why Bud went in the bakery, and I think Taz lived, but anyway, they were kicked out of the house at a real young age. He was not a nice guy. And later on, was it John or Neil that called Rex? Which one called you to see if they could be sealed to our dad? Because they hated their dad. You what? John. So they're sealed to their mother Bonnie, who was sealed to Dad.
Explain who those two are.
They are the children of Bonnie after she went back to Australia.
With
With
the
this chick.
second husband.
What was his first name? It doesn't make any difference.
But his
Anyway,
last
they
name
were
was
the
Chick.
children.
Yeah.
His pardon?
His last name was Chick.
Yeah, last name was Chick. But anyway, and they're both very active. But they called or got a hold of Rex and got permission from him to be sealed to our dad. Because they
well,
They hated-
Bonnie is sealed to our dad.
yeah, Bonnie is sealed and so's Mom.
And I was exploring this situation with the people in our temple, and they tell me that wouldn't even have been necessary because the sealing goes with the mother. Bonnie was sealed to our dad. They're sealed to Bonnie and our dad that way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well,
The sealing went with the mother.
but we never pursued that anymore. Bud and Taz were never.
Bud and Taz are sealed to Bonnie and our dad.
Yeah. But we're talking about Bonnie's children, not Bud and Taz. John and Neil Chick.
John and Neil's chick.
Oh,
goes
because
with the mother of
because
Bonnie.
Bonnie
It goes
was
with their
sealed.
mother.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're
So
saying.
Bonnie
boys-
was never sealed to Chick.
To the Chick.
Yeah.
No,
The
he
chick
wasn't.
boys
active.
belong to Bonnie and our dad.
Oh, I didn't
The
know
chick
that.
kids, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Then that sealing wouldn't have been necessary, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, that, I always remember the story of you telling us that Neil said, we're not related here on earth, but after we're gone, we're brothers.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not related blood-wise here on earth, but because you're both sealed to the same father,
And
yeah,
they have both been to the States, and they have both been to here.
yeah.
And great guy. I love to take. I can't remember which one was here, but I love to take them to priesthood meeting because the guys over there, they love that Southern
Oh, I
that
bet.
Australian
I bet.
brogue, and so they would ask them question after question in priesthood meeting just to listen to them talk. But yeah, they have both been. Well, which one was here when Dave, or was it Dave Dredge, or was it Eileen that passed away? Remember, we was all over the.
Yeah.
When we had that
Dave,
van.
his Uncle Dave,
Was it Neil or John that was?
Neil.
Yeah, he was to that funeral, and we were all in that van.
So I know Bud passed away. Did Taz pass away as well?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Bud passed away when Rex had just gotten home from the Oregon from the hospital. You were in the
You were already in Portland.
came home from
Oh,
Portland.
that's
He
right,
was
that's
in that
right.
one
yeah, we
medical
all met.
facility when
over
he
in-
passed away. Because you and
Taz
Marion
was
drove through.
Taz is buried in a military cemetery, and that's what's going to happen to Whitney. There's a military cemetery in Boise Valley, and Karen's going to have her cremated. And because I wanted a headstone of some kind, and she says, "Well, that's what they're going to do with." That's what the military does is cremate, and there's a spot with a plaque and everything, and there'll be a military rites for Whitney at that.
How many years was Whitney in the military, in the Navy?
8, I think.
8 years? Oh, wow.
She was a medic on board one of the aircraft carriers.
Oh, wow.
What was her rank? Do you remember her rank when she left?
I don't. It's on.
8 years is a long time.
Yeah, because she was stationed on the East Coast in Connecticut for 4 years there, besides the rest of her service. So I think it was 8 years.
Well, it's past
6
everyone's
or 8,
bedtime
but-
now.
Hey, where you guys going?
We're probably winding down.
This guy's winding down.
Yeah.
I'm already winding
I
down.
know, I get it. Let me just just an observation. It's just really interesting, you know, how talked about the Reed family and how, you know, Grandpa was not a member, and but you see the strength, right? The strength of testimony in that family. I mean, that is the backbone of many of our foundations, and interestingly enough, your mom, you know, married a man who was, you know, ended up not being active, and yet look at the strength and the testimony that you three share and have passed to all of us. And I mean, I think that it may be appropriate just to, you know, hear your thoughts, and you know, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and maybe just a short testimony.
You know, let me say this before I forget. During all of Mom's siblings' younger years, in the wintertime, Grandpa would hook up a sleigh, haul them all to church, and then he would go over to Mom's sister, Aunt Nell Mason, who her husband wasn't a member, and he'd drink coffee with them until they got out of church, and then he'd go pick them up and bring them home. So Grandpa was very supportive. He just didn't join, but he supported everything those kids did, and took them to church, made sure they was there, took Grandma and the kids in summer sleigh. And like I say, I heard many stories about riding in he'd hook up the horse in the sleigh in snowstorms and take them to church, but he didn't go in. So just a good man.
And our Grandma Pirro, we called her Grandma Pirro instead of Grandma Graham because Grandpa Roy Graham divorced her.
Yeah.
So she was Grandma Pirro to us, but she was very strong in the church and did a lot of genealogy and worked in the temple for years and years after her divorce.
Worked
She
in the
was-
Logan Temple a lot.
She was solid.
And Grandpa Roy did not support her. She lived on next to nothing when she lived in Logan. You don't think she had to live on is what money she made teaching piano lessons. I remember any comments about that. She was very brittle diabetic.
Grandpa Roy died pretty young.
Yeah.
He died in 1941. I was born in 43, so
I was only 2 years old, but I don't remember, and I don't know if Rex remembers him or not. You remember Roy?
He bought me some nibs.
Licorice?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That you hooked on black liquor?
Yeah.
What did he die of? Do you know?
Black licorice.
Needs to be. Needs to be
I don't remember
cherry.
what he died of.
I don't know what he died of either.
You know, because of his young death and our young death, and Rex felt the same way. We both thought we wouldn't live past our 56. I didn't think I'd live that long.
Yeah.
But Roy's father outlived him.
Yeah.
Frank outlived him. Outlived Roy.
He was in his 90s. I remember Marion telling me where he lived in town. And we always knew him as Old Man Graham. That's what Marion said. But he lived. His wife died when he was in his 50s, and he did nothing but hunt and fish in the mountains the rest of his life. Never remarried. He enjoyed the mountains.
Sounds like a perfect life to me.
Well, in the house that he lived in, I remember seeing it before they tore it down. Every time he went to the mountains, he brought home a pine tree, and around his house was just like a forest. I remember Marion pointing it out to me, and it wasn't too long after we got married that somebody bought that and tore all those out and built a new home. But
Do any of you know Annette Kolosky? Koslowski?
Yeah,
oh yeah,
that's. Did you get a message from her or something?
No, we're in contact with her.
well, yeah, that's Taz's daughter, Annette. That's
That's
who
Taz and
Helga
Helga's
lives with.
daughter, and Helga, Taz's wife, is living with her.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we're up in Seattle.
So are you in contact?
I've talked to. It's been about a year and a half since I called Annette about a year and a half ago, thinking I was going to get to talk to Helga, and Annette told me at the time she wouldn't know who you are,
Oh, really?
and so she didn't think there was any point in me talking to Helga. So I just chatted with Annette a little bit, and
Yeah,
that's
that's
all.
where Helga is.
So
And they
And
live
we've
back.
talked
They live
to-
back
We've
east.
talked
No,
to
they're up in
Annette.
Seattle.
No, they live
Oh,
in
in Seattle.
South
up
of
by
Seattle.
Tacoma,
She's the one
Yeah.
that set up the whole
just north of Tacoma.
process when we got married,
Yeah.
because she was in that.
Okay.
So it's recently we called Annette.
did you call her recently?
Mhm.
And what'd you learn? Did you get to talk to her?
Well, she's
That,
cool.
I just wanted to know if you knew how to get a hold of her. I have a phone number here,
Oh, I have
Oh, I got her phone
her
number
phone
too.
number too.
so y'all know.
So did she happen to say anything
And
about
then,
Helga and how Helga's doing?
Helga's fine.
Helga's doing physically. I think she said Helga was she had overcome a bout of cancer,
Right.
but
Yeah,
she had quite a bit of dementia.
It's been about maybe 8 weeks ago, maybe sooner than that. Anyway, so I just was curious. Y'all know who she
Yeah,
is,
we know
Helga,
who she is. Yeah.
but I do have a phone number. to contact.
Okay.
So I have a final question for you. So we're going to get a copy of this recording, and I want my kids to listen to this, and I want you to, if you could speak to my kids are in their 20s and 30s. If you could speak to the 20 and 30-year-old kids in our family, what sort of advice, words of wisdom would you want to share with them? Dad,
Yeah.
start with you.
Yeah.
Well, I think Gail's funeral today indicated that he was active in the church and wanted to share the gospel. And my feeling is that it was he and Grandma and Grandpa Reed and Grandma Pirro is the reason that I think our 3 boys stayed active in the church and that I've been active in the church. I thought many times this evening about Dad, and I feel like that since I'm gonna go next,
Maybe.
that I'll have a chance to talk to him about the church, and maybe he and Mother will come together again. But regardless of whatever has been said here this afternoon, I've appreciated the comments that Gordon and Gary have shared with you all, but my point, I suppose, would be to remain true to the gospel. Every one of us. I think Jesus Christ is our older brother, but he is also the creator of this planet, and that he's the Father and Son of us all. And then the next thing I would say is that I love everybody in this room, in this area, and I hope that we'll all stay that same way throughout the rest of our lives, and sharing our love one for another, and just stays true to the gospel. I guess that's all I really want to say.
Thanks, Dad.
Well, that's more than he said all night, and I can't say anything more than what he said. I mean, everything he said is exactly true, and that's how I feel. The older you get, the more you understand, not completely, but you understand the meaning of life and why we're here, and it's hard to grasp when you're younger, that type of thing. But it's, the gospel's true. You can't deny it. I tell my father every night that I'm grateful for another day here on this earth. And I just hope I live worthy to be with Marion when I pass through the veil. But Rick hadn't talked all night, but he said everything that needed to be said. Gordon's turn.
Well, as I indicated earlier, my testimony goes back to that testimony of the Book of Mormon that I received when I was about 18, 19, thereabouts. And, you know, there's all kinds of arguments against the church, I would say. There's all kinds of people who want to argue against it and have this problem with it or that problem with it. But it all comes back to, is the Book of Mormon true or is it not? And for me, I have received an absolute sure testimony that it is true, and that I read it once or twice a year for years and years, and it just becomes more and more true. And what's true is its testimony of the Savior, Jesus Christ. He absolutely lives. He is our Savior. I can always fall, when I get thinking about other strange and weird things and there are doubts that creep around, I can always go back. The Book of Mormon is true, and the rest of it is true. That Joseph Smith truly was the Lord's prophet in bringing that book to pass and restoring the church. And everything I've experienced in life since then points that it's true. I've served in the temple for 15 years, and every time there's a spiritual experience that you know that work is true. That there are people on the other side of the veil coming to the temple along with the people on this side of the veil to get their work done. We'll, in the temple we perform ordinances for those that have passed on, and sometimes we'll have lists of names, and we go going through these lists of names, and all of a sudden, you're real one, he's there. And it's just out of the blue, it's not like this is that you're expecting it or something brought it to pass, other than the fact that person is there, and they're there. So there's just too many witnesses, too many testimonies in my life to doubt it. And when you start having doubts, just go back to the Book of Mormon. Is it true or is it not? And the only way you know if it's true is to ask your Heavenly Father. You to listen to someone else with all the arguments they may have for or against. It doesn't mean much compared with the testimony that you get by asking our Heavenly Father and getting that witness. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
You're great examples to all of us, and we love you. And,
Come you put us on the spot.
Let's start here and go around,
yeah,
just so we can see who all was here.
thanks for Lisa
Oh, well.
recording all this.
Yeah,
This was not a random event. This has been a planned event since we knew you were all
Yeah,
going to
we've
be
been
together.
we've
Oh,
been
really?
You've been buffaloed.
Buffalo.
Yeah.
Been whatever. I wasn't sure. We've been whatever.
We knew you were going to come.
You guys are amazing.
We
Yeah.
we love you. We're grateful for the strength that you've been to all of us. None of us would be the people that we are without you. So, thank you for being that source of strength that you received from the higher generation to us.
Okay, amen. That's sufficient.
Yeah.
hallelujah.